This is, to me, the perfect structure for a pitch deck. We've written hundreds of decks using this approach, over $300 million raised last year with decks that we wrote or designed, and we know that it works, and we didn't make this up, of course. For years, we've looked at pitch decks from the most successful companies, and every single one of them focused on telling a story. This structure helps tell a story. In the end, a pitch deck is a story about what your company has achieved and wants to continue to achieve, but when your day-to-day is metrics or marketing or sales or building products, it's not easy to zoom out and distill everything that you have in your head. So in this video, I'm gonna go one by one on those slides, give you a few pointers on how to solve each one of them. That template is, of course, available on our platform to download because we don't make a living from YouTube. We're in the business of helping founders scale. I've done a bunch of videos on pitch decks, but every year we learn something new and we need to update it. So this is everything we know about pitch decks. Now, before we dive into each slide, let's, like I said, zoom out a bit. These are the questions that the pitch deck needs to answer. What opportunity have you discovered in the market? What have you built to tackle it and how does it work? Who is it for? How much are you growing and will you continue to grow? And why are you and your team the team that can change the status quo? That's it. As you're writing your deck, make sure that you keep this cheat sheet of questions as a reference, and you want to test every single slide that you write against the question that it's trying to answer. Now, most decks are consumed over email. Decks for demo days or for meetings with investors can be different because you'll be standing in front of the slides. You'll be providing additional context and detail and answering questions. But those are the minority. To get a meeting with an investor, most of them will ask you for a deck over email so that they can consume on their own time before spending a half an hour with you. I call that an email deck, and it needs to do the job of answering those 4 questions in about 4 minutes. Forget about the number of slides. That's pretty relevant. It's not the number of slides, it's the time it takes to consume the deck. If your deck is too long or your slides are too crowded, people will skim through them instead of reading. If your slide has 3 sentences, then there's really no way that you can skip through that. You're gonna read them regardless. So now let's tie those questions to slides, or rather to sections of the deck. The status quo covers what is happening in the market and what you envision as a solution. It answers that first question. What opportunity have you discovered in the market? Then the product section answers the question of what have you built to tackle it? How does it work and who is it for? You can start to figure out that the slides that would probably go in this section all relate to the product. It's screenshots, it's target customers, milestones, roadmap, and business model, for example. Next up is the market section. This is targeted at answering the question of how much are you growing and how much will the company continue to grow. Remember, most companies raise capital when they have traction, not before. The market section includes things such as the go-to-market strategy, which is how you're going to get customers, and the market size, which is simply how big does the business get. Finally, we have the why us section, which covers why you and your team are the team to change that status quo. This section gets into the competition and why they suck, as well as the team. And there you go. We've now answered every single question that we set out to answer. And we can wrap these slides with an intro and an ask. If you've done your convincing well, you can now ask for funding. Now, a common question that we get is, well, can this order change? I'm all for rules that were made to be broken statements, but if you change this order, make sure that it doesn't break the story. For example, if you sneak the team slide on the second slide, you're essentially breaking the answer to that last question in 2 parts, which might be harder to get. Or if you first tell us about the product without touching on the status quo, then suddenly the product doesn't necessarily feel justified. We don't know if there's a need in the market for it. Another important note before we jump into each one of these slides is that you don't need every single one of them. If you add every slide in this guide, I guarantee you're gonna have a deck that can't be consumed in 4 minutes. You have to pick the slides that do the best job at answering your own questions, the questions that your business is answering. But again, you don't need them all. And last note, before we get into slides, remember that we do this for a living in 2 main ways. Our platform has a pitch deck builder where you can find templates and references from hundreds of decks. It also has an investor finder and a 4-hour course on what we're covering today, and a bunch of other things. And then we also have an agency branch, which is a team of analysts and designers that can help you nail that deck from designing the slides you already wrote to writing them from scratch. Links below, as always, including a copy of the template that I'm going to show you. Okay, so let's go slide by slide. The intro usually means just the cover. There's not much to add here other than a tagline, which is this 5 to 7 word description of what you do. Finding a tagline for your business is not easy. It took us months to get to ours. Also, the tagline is not necessarily your marketing slogan. It's just a good description of what you do in plain English without any marketing jargon. Now, if the company has relevant traction, it's sometimes useful to brag about that early on to make it kind of a hook for the rest of the deck. This must be really good traction, exciting stuff. Think 20% monthly growth in revenue or in monthly active users, not vanity metrics like downloads. If you don't have any of those, just keep calm, carry on, get to the status quo. Remember that in the status quo section, we're answering what opportunity you've discovered in the market. Just keep that in mind. Usually this is answered via a slide combo. It's the problem and the solution. And you should always think of those slides as interconnected. Airbnb's deck from 2009, the one they used for their Y Combinator demo day, is, I think, perfect example. See how their problems get matched to a solution on the next slide. These statements need to be clear, objective, or based on real world data. For example, on Uber's deck, we had 2 problem slides, which is totally fair, and all of these statements are undebatable. Medallions are expensive, hailing is inefficient, there is no accountability. These are all true statements. They could have gone with something like the taxi experience is terrible, and I think few people would argue with that, but it's always better to use facts rather than opinions. And you can almost connect each one of these statements to an Uber feature. So on the problem slide, we're looking for short, to-the-point statements and facts over opinions. On the solution slide, we want to provide an answer to each one of those statements on the problem slide. Now back to Airbnb, notice how this answer doesn't come in the form of features. We're not getting into the product just yet. The solution slide is more of a 30,000-foot view of what your product, what your company does. Now, most companies start there. The founders identify an inefficient process, an underserved market, a missing opportunity in an industry, and they build a solution around it. Now, there's an exception here because some startups just don't solve problems. Games, for example, are not solving anything. They're not solving a lack of games in a genre, but they're rather tackling a business opportunity. I worked on this deck the other day for an EV charging station company. There are plenty of large companies who supply EV chargers, but the industry is expected to grow 10x over the next 7 years, from 10 to $100+ billion. There's an obvious business opportunity here. Now remember, this status quo section is key. If the investor reading the deck doesn't buy into this problem, they might just stop looking at the deck right here. This very much connects to doing your research about that investor. You want to be sending this to someone who has an interest in the industry that you're playing in. And lastly, these 3 or 4 sentences are key to proving your own industry expertise. Normally, these problems aren't immediately obvious to people. So by coming up with solid questionings about that status quo, you're showing your own expertise in the market that you intend to target, which you should absolutely have. In the consulting projects that we take, these are probably the slides that take the most amount of time. So don't be afraid if you're spending a few hours thinking of these problem-solution combinations. And if you're struggling, you know where to find us. Let's go to the product section. This is the most flexible, really. Remember that we're answering what have we built to tackle the opportunity, how does it work, and who is it for? And it's usually easy for us founders to talk about our own products. So the challenge for these slides is mostly about compressing the info to a reasonable amount of slides. And remember, by amount of slides, the concern is not the number of slides, but the time that it'll take to consume them. A slide with a product screenshot and a small caption takes 5 seconds to consume. We'd rather see 3 slides like that than trying to compress everything in a single slide. Also, you don't get to see the interface if it's just tiny inside a phone. Now, let me speak quickly about the different slides that you can add to this section. You can have a slide with some product screenshots or a demo video. Not everybody wants to commit 2 or 3 minutes to watching a video. Remember that their time allocation for consuming this deck is about 4 minutes. So I always recommend screenshots over video. Another way to approach this is with a step-by-step diagram, showing this simple map or story of how the platform works. A features slide lets you list some of the core benefits of the product. I always recommend talking about the benefit to the user rather than the feature itself. For example, for our pitch deck builder, we've always used edit your pitch deck on the go on your phone rather than responsive editor. Also, make sure that you show, don't tell if possible. Easy to use is very subjective, while a screenshot of a clean interface actually proves that you made that happen. Same, by the way, for AI and ML stuff. These have become buzzwords in the past few years that people throw out quite mindlessly. It's much better to show how efficient your AI is at solving a task rather than just saying that there's AI or machine learning in your platform. Now, if your product has a unique piece of technology, you can use a tech infrastructure slide to show a diagram of the infrastructure. It's not particularly common, but very much applicable to blockchain companies, for example, in which case you're essentially elaborating about the white paper. The market validation slide is important if your product has a premise that people can easily get behind. Back to Airbnb, for example, this idea of people hosting strangers on their homes wasn't obvious back in 2009. So they used Craigslist and Couchsurfing as references to prove that thousands of people were in fact willing to post other people. Strong market valuation slides use revenue generating examples. I see a lot of founders trying to mention that they've interviewed 20 people in the industry, which is something you should have done anyway. So I don't think it necessarily deserves a slide. Now, I do consider the audience slide a necessary one. In this slide, you want to identify a persona that buys your product. Having a well-defined target user goes a long way. It shows that you know who the product is for. It shows that you've researched them. It shows that you've narrowed down your focus, which means that your features and your growth efforts will have a target, a thought-out audience rather than spreading yourself too thin. Think of genres, age brackets, location, income brackets. No startup can target all audiences at the same time. Another way to approach this slide, by the way, especially useful for B2B companies, is with a case study. Ideally, this should be an instance where your product was adopted by another company, so you can mention who used it, how useful was it, and how it affected their job. This once again shows focus. The business in the case study should reveal to the reader the industry and the size of the company that you target. It should also let them know who the key person in that company was, the key decision maker, who will eventually become your buyer and who you're going to be targeting all the time. If you have a real case study, absolutely go with that. If not, a sample scenario still works. The business model slide is also necessary, I think. We're gonna need those details for the market size. Now, this is a pretty easy slide that people like to overcomplicate. All we wanna know here is how you make money. Is it a subscription? Is it a per use thing? What's the average deal size? Or if it's a marketplace or an e-commerce, how do your margins look like? Don't spend any time on this slide talking about projections. Just tell us how you charge customers. And then to wrap the product section, you could add a roadmap slide that talks about key product milestones as well as future plans for the company. Remember, we are talking about the product here. It's not about revenue, again, not revenue projections, more about the product roadmap. Investors also don't care too much about milestones like incorporation or recruiting a team member. It's more about the product itself. As for the future, your focus should be especially on what's going to happen over the next 12 months, which is the time that likely this round of capital is going to be funding. If you have a long-term or longer-term product vision, you can even branch that out into a new slide so that it doesn't feel like a distraction from the immediate future, which again is where your investors' money is going to go. Okay, so now moving into the market section. Remember, what we're trying to answer here is how much are you growing and how will you continue to grow? This all starts with a traction slide, of course. If you have no traction, you should first reconsider who you're pitching with this deck. Companies in idea stage can raise money from friends and family, so you might need a deck for them, but it's unlikely that you'll raise money from strangers. A good traction slide should show growth on core KPIs like revenue or monthly active users, and avoid vanity metrics like downloads or signups, since they don't really represent true adoption of your product. Lastly, remember that single data points are just dots, but you can turn that into a story by just turning them into a chart with historicals. Making $10,000 this month or last month is cool, but we want to know if that's growing or shrinking, if it's a trend or an anomaly. And the easiest and quickest way to understand that is with a chart. The go-to-market slide is another one where we see a lot of founders struggle. Most of the bad slides I see are just a list of 10 marketing channels, which shows that the team hasn't really thought out any of them through. Again, shows a lack of focus. A great go-to-market slide focuses on one, maybe two strategies and dives very deep into them. If these are strategies that you're already using, you can even get into some of the unit economics and the costs. If they're new, then you can just detail a plan, a timeline, budget, expectations. Ideally, these should be campaigns or channels that you've previous experience with, even if it's working with another companies, and that you can attest to its effectiveness. It's not just a random list of what you have in mind to do. Go-to-market is important not only because a good portion of raised capital usually gets invested in growth, but because you need to prove that you're reaching your next fundable milestone. For software companies, for example, a pre-seed round is usually a pre-product idea stage type of round, but whatever you raise needs to be enough to get to the next fundable milestone, which is seed funding. A seed round, again, for software companies, is usually raised with a live product and with some solid month-over-month revenue growth, maybe 20% or more. Once again, your go-to-market needs to show that you can reach the next milestone, which is Series A. For SaaS companies specifically, Series A rounds happen at around $1.5 to $2 million of annual run rate at least. Hardware companies, blockchain companies, and biotech operate very differently around what these milestones are, but again, you need to show that you've budgeted what you need to reach that next milestone. The market slide is another slide where founders struggle a lot. It should answer the simple question of how much revenue can your business generate annually. It's not the size of the industry. It's not the size of the market in general. You don't need to break down the TAM, SAM, SOM. It's about your specific business and how big it gets. The math is extremely simple. And at the same time, it's really hard to get right. It's just potential customers times annual revenue per customer. That's it. Finding your annual revenue per customer depends on the business model slide, which we touched on already. The hard part here is confirming that your business model is indeed compatible with customers, that your pricing, your plan will be accepted by the market. Finding the number of customers is the hard part because you have to really narrow that down to the people or the companies that will buy from you. Steve Barsh, one of our investors, made a fantastic video of good practices on TAM, and I'm going to drop it in the description below. Okay, so now we're at the last bit of the deck. The question to answer is why you and your team are the team that changes the status quo. You can talk about competitors in a bunch of different ways, but the end goal is always to show that you understand your market and that your competitors don't, or that you have a better understanding. It's less about comparing features. Again, it's about why you. For example, you can use the famous 2-axis chart that Steve Jobs used as long as you use it right. Those charts work as long as you have just 2 clear variables. One for the horizontal, one for the vertical axis. It also works as long as your product is a clear outlier. If you have other products on that top right section, then it's not really the best of arguments. Another approach is to just list features, pricing, and to compare them. That works as long as it focuses on market understanding. It's not just showing that you have more features or cheaper pricing, but confirming that your competitors can't easily copy this or wouldn't want to. The last approach I'll mention is just listing 3 companies and writing a few lines about each one of them. You can mention their size, their location, their funding as a reference, and then simply state what they don't know about the market that you do. Talking about how much they've raised also helps give investors a perspective on how big the market can get or how big your company can get. As for the team, what we want to see here is not founders, not advisors, not the entire team, but key people. The people on the slide should have the skills to bring the company to that next fundable milestone. If you're building an app, then the technical lead, which is likely your CTO, should be here. If you're aiming for 20% month-over-month growth, then your head of marketing or your head of sales should be here regardless of their founder status. If you don't have that person on your team, you probably need them before you can actually close a round. Recruiting for early stage is really hard, and money is not the answer. It's networking, it's getting people to believe in this idea enough to take a risk and work with you. Funding is not going to solve that. We have a whole video on finding co-founders, which I'll also link down below. Now, the bios for those people should also focus on that industry expertise, on what they're doing for the company, what they've done before that's related to this, rather than unrelated achievements. After looking at thousands of decks, trust me, Ivy League schools stopped being surprising. They're not irrelevant, don't get me wrong, but experience is what really makes a team interesting. Now, you can close the Why Us section with a Why Now slide, which is optional but useful if there's some time constraint that you want to use to your advantage to close the round. If, for example, there are a few competitors at the moment, either because people haven't figured out this business opportunity or because there's some legal or logistic barrier for others to enter the market, and money can make you sort of win that race. You can also frame this slide as the secret sauce, where you highlight some unique technology, strong network connections, or a very unique understanding that nobody else has and that sort of protects you, that builds a moat against these competitors. And that concludes the story side of the deck. And if you did your job well, investors should be convinced by now. The last couple slides, which would represent the ask, focus on your financial estimations and on the amount of money that you're raising, the terms, and the use of funds. But it's not about the story of the company. Now, by no means should you underestimate these slides, mind you. We have plenty of videos covering how to solve your financial models, including this one from last week, which covers financial modeling from the abstract to the spreadsheet. Remember that this template that I've been referring to is available for download on Slidebean. With just a click, you can apply your branding and be on your way. If you need our help to write or design any of the slides on the deck, you can chat with our sales team. I've linked their calendars below. Good luck. Thanks a lot for watching.